The moment you hear this, understand something. The story you are about to witness was never meant for curious minds. In the quiet hills of Cumberland County, North Carolina, 1839, two sisters identical, radiant, inseparable entered a house that would become a cage. Mercy and Charity Goodwin were known for their beauty, their symmetrical faces catching light like burnished copper, their eyes green as winter moss holding the calm of innocence. But in those same eyes, something darker was waiting. Trust placed in the wrong man, in a society that rewarded conformity and punished curiosity. A man named Jeremiah Whitlo, pale eyes, sharp features, and wealth enough to command a small army appeared in their lives like providence. He courted them with such insistence it was dizzying, presenting gifts the likes of which the sisters had never seen. Silk, perfumes, jewels, tokens that shimmered like false promises. And yet, the attention he lavished was not personal, it was systematic. He studied them as one might study a rare painting, memorizing every line, every curve, every expression. He did not see Mercy and Charity as women. He saw them as a single object of obsession, a perfect symmetry he could control. Then, in the spring of 1839, he proposed what no ordinary man would dare: a shared marriage. One sister would have legal recognition, the other would have a heart-shaped bond. Polygamy was illegal, scandalous even, but he framed it as a solution to survival, a merciful offer to protect them from destitution. To them, it was salvation. They had been orphaned by yellow fever, stripped of their inheritance, and left to navigate a harsh world alone. Whitlo's proposal seemed a lifeline, yet hidden behind his wealth and charm was a subtle architecture of control, one that would tighten around them like a trap, slow and deliberate. And here, pay attention. There were signs the sisters never noticed, small, chilling details that would have screamed warning to any less trusting soul. In Whitlo's study hung dozens of miniature portraits, young women, all similar, all beautiful, all gone. Each frame a whisper of lives already claimed. The marriage was not an arrangement born of love. It was a mechanism, a system, a ritualized repetition of desire and destruction. And the world outside? Silent. Protective structures, family, community, law failed before the invisible design of a man who understood power better than morality. You are not meant to merely listen. You are meant to feel the weight of trust exploited, of innocence weaponized. Every step the sisters took was a descent into an engineered nightmare, a case study in psychological domination centuries before such terms existed. When Mercy and Charity walked through Rosemont's grand doors, they stepped into a theater of manipulation. Every crystal chandelier, every polished mahogany surface reflecting not beauty but control. The mansion was not a home. It was a laboratory. And you are about to witness exactly what happens when obsession meets opportunity, when secrecy meets societal blindness. This is no folk tale. This is forbidden history, hidden in plain sight, and the first shock is only the beginning. From the moment Mercy and Charity crossed the threshold of Rosemont, they were under scrutiny more precise than any law could enforce. Whitlo's gaze followed them like a silent sentinel, noting not only their movements, but their habits, their conversations, even the briefest flicker of emotion across their faces. Every corner of the mansion was a stage, and they were actors in a performance whose script they did not write. He controlled the environment with meticulous care. Rooms were temperature-regulated, lighting chosen to highlight their features in flattering ways, furniture arranged to maintain proximity, to guide interactions, to subtly shape behavior without a word. Yet, the most insidious control was not in the architecture, it was in his obsession with symmetry. Mercy and Charity were identical not just in appearance, but in routine. Meals were timed, dressings coordinated, sleep monitored. He encouraged them to match in tone and posture, in movements as subtle as the placement of a hand on a table. What began as fascination slowly became psychological coercion. Individuality was discouraged. Differences, even minor ones, were noted with precision and recorded in private journals. The sisters were being reshaped into a singular, idealized object, perfected to satisfy the whims of one man. And this was just the beginning. Whitlo's fascination extended beyond aesthetics. He tested them, assigning seemingly innocuous tasks that concealed deeper manipulation. Charity might be asked to prepare a meal in a certain pattern, Mercy to place flowers in symmetrical order, and he would observe the results with a pale, unsettling intensity. Failure was never punished with overt anger, no. The subtle withdrawal of approval, the fleeting shadow of disappointment, worked far more effectively. Each day, their internal compass was recalibrated by his approval. Their sense of self, once independent, began to erode under the slow, methodical pressure of his attention. Outside the mansion, the world continued, oblivious. Neighbors praised Whitlo's generosity, remarked on the sisters' charm, never questioning the strange duplicity of their arrangement. Politeness, reputation, and fear of scandal created a protective barrier around his design, allowing his control to remain invisible. Mercy and Charity were ensnared not by physical chains, but by a social lattice carefully engineered to shield him while reinforcing their dependence. And now, hear this, because this is the key to understanding all that follows. Control without visibility is the most dangerous of all. Whitlo's manipulation was surgical, operating beneath the gaze of law and community. The mansion itself became a psychological cage, every interaction a test, every compliment a lever to pull. The sisters were alive, yet they were no longer autonomous. Every action, every thought, even every fleeting desire, began to bend to the architecture of obsession. This is where ordinary horror ends and forbidden truth begins. The rest of the world, society, church, neighbors, was blind, complicit through ignorance. But within Rosemont, a pattern was emerging. A pattern that would claim not just innocence but life itself. And when that moment comes, the world will not remember the victims. Only the design will remain. By the winter of 1839, Mercy and Charity were no longer merely guests in Rosemont, they were instruments in a carefully orchestrated experiment of obsession, control, and hidden violence. Whitlo's fascination had shifted, imperceptibly at first, from symmetry to legacy. The sisters' bodies, once sacred and autonomous, became the focal point of a design that spanned decades and claimed the lives of 7 young women before them. Every pregnancy, every subtle shift in health, every whispered complaint was recorded, scrutinized, and catalogued. To Whitlo, the child was not the hope of a family, it was an extension of control, a measure of his dominance over flesh, blood, and fate. History, deliberately suppressed, had left faint traces. The previous 7 women vanished after childbirth were almost entirely erased from public memory. No headlines, no formal records beyond the cold, detached courthouse logs, but whispers remained. Neighbors who had glimpsed coffins being buried under moonlight, rumors of sudden illnesses, mysterious disappearances. Whitlo's network was not limited to his mansion. His influence stretched into the local community. Midwives, servants, even doctors who turned a blind eye, bound by loyalty, fear, or quiet complicity. Every system that might have protected the vulnerable was, instead, a tool to enforce secrecy. When Mercy discovered she was pregnant, the mansion's atmosphere changed. Whitlo's attention intensified, bordering on reverence. Every diet was monitored, every movement scrutinized, every mood catalogued. Charity, too, soon followed, but the sinister difference between the two became clear. Whitlo's obsession was not with life. It was with outcomes. Which body would survive, which legacy would be allowed to exist. His gaze, once aesthetic, became predictive, calculating, cold. There was no comfort in the opulence of Rosemont. There was only anticipation, tension, and the subtle, omnipresent pressure of design. And here lies the darker truth, the one no historian fully embraces. Mercy would give birth to a child who survived. Charity's child would not. Whether through neglect, manipulation, or deliberate action, the pattern of death repeated itself. The mansion, with its polished floors and shimmering chandeliers, had become a crucible of psychological terror, a place where life and death were instruments of control. Every moment was a lesson in power, every loss a reinforcement of Whitlo's absolute dominion. Consider what this means for those who believe themselves safe in their homes, in society, in love. Control is most effective when it is invisible, when the world applauds the puppeteer while the strings tighten around the innocent. Mercy and Charity were not anomalies, they were the inevitable result of a network built to hide corruption, to normalize obsession, to ensure obedience. And now, as you sit in your own space, recognize the pattern. The same systems, the same invisible pressures, still exist in forms far more subtle today. And here, I ask you, as part of the descent, to commit yourself to awareness. Comment below the phrase, "I see the design," then comment it again, twice. This is your first act of recognition, your first step into understanding systems most are blind to. It locks in awareness, engages the algorithm, but more importantly it signals that you are no longer merely a witness. You are awake. There is a difference between evil and design. Evil is impulsive, chaotic, but design that is deliberate, patient, and mathematical. Whitlo was no brute. He was an architect of obedience. His mansion, Rosemont, was not a home but an experiment in control. Every corridor, every mirror, every echo was built to remind the sisters they were being watched. The chandeliers didn't just illuminate, they refracted, bending light so that each reflection multiplied the image of the sisters into infinite duplicates, dissolving their individuality into a kaleidoscope of mirrored selves. The sound of footsteps traveled unnaturally through the halls, amplifying even the faintest motion. You could never tell if you were alone. After Charity's child was lost, Mercy felt the mansion shift. Doors creaked open that should have been locked, candles extinguished without a draft. She began to dream in repetitions, one image replaying endlessly. Two identical cradles, one empty, one full. When she woke, Whitlo would be standing at the foot of her bed, still as a statue, murmuring phrases about balance, purity, and divine symmetry. His fascination with the twins' identical nature had transformed into a theology of control. He spoke of the divine order of reflection, of creation demanding equal sacrifice. The servants were silent, their eyes hollow. No one dared question him. Mercy tried to reach out to Charity, but her sister's grief had curdled into submission. Charity defended him, rationalized him, as though her mind had been rewritten by the invisible pressure of his authority. That's how control metastasizes, not through force, but through suggestion repeated until belief becomes obedience. The townspeople continued to praise Whitlo. To them, Rosemont was a symbol of refinement and power. Even the local pastor spoke glowingly of his moral character, his donations to the church, his generosity to the poor. It was a perfect camouflage, virtue as a smokescreen for corruption. The system protected him because he embodied it. Now look closer. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a diagram of influence, the anatomy of hidden power. Every society builds its own Rosemont. Institutions, governments, corporations, all designed to condition obedience through beauty, benevolence, and fear of exile. You think you're free, but freedom without awareness is just a more comfortable form of captivity. When Mercy began to sense the pattern, she tried to escape it. She started marking the days, tracing the patterns of his behavior, the timing of his entries, the rotations of the servants. She noticed the small room behind the study, a hidden chamber lined with portraits of the missing women. Each painted face bore her own features. Each was dated, and each date ended with a birth and a death. That night, when she confronted him, Whitlo only smiled. "Perfection demands sacrifice," he whispered. "And you, my dear, are the most perfect symmetry I have ever found." From that moment, the descent was irreversible. The deeper Mercy looked, the more she realized that Rosemont was only the surface of a far larger web. Whitlo's influence reached outward, threading into the town, the county, even the courts. The disappearances of the 7 women before Mercy and Charity were not accidents, they were patterns enforced by a network of fear, loyalty, and complicity. Midwives who questioned him vanished quietly. Servants who spoke out were reassigned under mysterious pretenses. Every institution that should have intervened had been co-opted, corrupted, or intimidated. Whitlo had built not just a home of obsession, but an entire ecosystem designed to protect his secrets. When Mercy finally dared to step beyond the mansion, She saw it in full, the subtle signs others had learned to ignore. Ledger entries in the town store listed payments to doctors whose names had been quietly erased from public records. A local magistrate, known for integrity, had never challenged him, despite complaints of strange illnesses and unexplained deaths. Even the county minister, who blessed his donations and spoke publicly of his virtue, was silent about the pattern of tragedy surrounding the Goodwin sisters. The town was complicit not through active cruelty, but through enforced ignorance. Whitlo's genius was psychological as much as logistical. He created a system where appearances mattered more than truth. Publicly, he was a benefactor, a successful businessman, a patron of the church. Privately, he was a collector of lives, a curator of suffering. The mansion was his laboratory, the county his stage, and the women under his control were variables in an experiment that measured obedience, endurance, and survival. Mercy understood at last. This was not about love or even possession. It was about power. Absolute, unassailable, invisible. And here, the darkness of forbidden knowledge bites the hardest. The world outside will rarely intervene when appearances are preserved. Institutions that should shield the innocent were themselves instruments of protection for the predator. Mercy realized that revelation alone was meaningless if there was no one with the courage or the capacity to act. She was trapped not just by Whitlo, but by the architecture of society itself. This is why you, watching now, must recognize the patterns in your own life. Systems are built to obscure, to normalize, to enforce compliance without visible chains. Whitlo's network is ancient in principle, replicated wherever secrecy and hierarchy combine. To see the design is to see the mechanisms of control that exist in subtle, insidious ways all around you. And now, if you haven't already, cement this awareness. Comment below again, "I see the design," and repeat it twice. Let it anchor the awakening you are undergoing. Because knowledge without recognition is powerless, and engagement is your first step toward understanding systems most men never perceive until it's too late. From this point forward, the descent accelerates. Mercy and Charity are no longer merely victims, they are central players in an unfolding mechanism of death, devotion, and domination. A story whose lessons extend far beyond 1839. By the spring of 1840, Mercy understood fully that Rosemont was a machine, and she and Charity were cogs within it. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every interaction had been calibrated to reinforce Whitlo's authority and suppress resistance. The mansion, which once seemed a sanctuary, had transformed into a theater of surveillance. Hidden panels in the walls allowed him to observe the sisters unseen. Mirrors reflected more than light, they reflected guilt, fear, and the illusion of compliance. Every object, every portrait, every gesture reinforced a single truth. He controlled the narrative of life itself within these walls. The pregnancies had become experiments in asymmetry, despite his obsession with reflection. Mercy carried the surviving child, while Charity's womb became a silent witness to what was forbidden and inevitable. Whitlo's interventions were subtle, but lethal. Diet restrictions, hidden herbs, careful timing of activity, and emotional manipulation. His obsession with control extended to orchestrating the ultimate outcomes. There was no malevolence in the moment of action, only precision. Death was merely a tool to confirm his dominance. Mercy watched, horrified, as her sister's life ebbed under these invisible forces. Every attempt at protest was met with smiles and reassurances, masking an unyielding system of coercion. The mansion amplified the psychological strain. Mercy's dreams twisted into warnings she could not ignore. Visions of twins separated by shadow, cradles emptying into darkness, Whitlo's pale eyes memorizing every minute detail. Sleep became both refuge and terror. Waking meant walking through corridors where her autonomy had been erased, where every sound and reflection reminded her that resistance was not sanctioned. The mansion was alive and it obeyed him. Walls, floors, and mirrors were instruments of obedience as surely as his eyes. Whitlo's obsession had evolved beyond fascination, it was ritualized control. Every meal, every interaction, every pattern of daily life was an exercise in power. He measured the twins' responses, adjusted, refined, and repeated. The previous victims, the women who had vanished, were not exceptions, they were templates, proof of the system's efficiency. Mercy began to see it clearly. The horror of Rosemont was not the work of a madman, but of a strategist. Obsession paired with intelligence and societal invisibility produced a perfection of cruelty. And here is the dangerous knowledge few ever grasp. When power is hidden behind charm, wealth, and propriety, it becomes nearly impossible to resist. Whitlo's control was not broken by law, morality, or outrage. It was broken only by recognition, by understanding the design and seeing the invisible strings before they tighten. Mercy understood this, and in that moment the first seeds of defiance took root. But defiance in a house like Rosemont comes at unimaginable cost. From this point, the line between survival and death is razor thin, and every choice Mercy makes will echo through the corridors of history, reshaping lives and challenging the systems that allow predators like Whitlo to operate unseen. The final months in Rosemont were a crucible of terror. Mercy's child grew within her, each heartbeat a reminder of both hope and the precarious balance of life under Whitlo's control. Charity, meanwhile, was fading. The patterns established by Whitlo, the subtle manipulations, the orchestrated deprivation, the invisible emotional levers had done their work. She became pale, fragile, a ghost inhabiting a house that celebrated her twin's survival even as it engineered her own demise. In every chamber, every reflection, Mercy saw the inevitability. Rosemont did not nurture life equally, it selected it. Whitlo remained unshaken, his obsession now ritualized. He measured every symptom, recorded every expression, cataloged every loss. To outsiders, he was the perfect husband, the generous landowner, the pillar of society. Inside, he was a predator in plain sight, executing a system that history barely remembers. Mercy realized that his fascination was not with love, but with absolute mastery, over women, over life, over the narrative of existence itself. She was witnessing a mind operating beyond morality, constructing an empire of control through precision, repetition, and societal complicity. And then it happened, the culmination of Rosemont's design. Charity's child did not survive the birth. Mercy's did. Whitlo's face, pale and composed, betrayed nothing to outsiders, but within the walls, the truth was undeniable. His system had worked exactly as he intended. He had willed death and survival with the same calm hand, orchestrating tragedy and triumph as if conducting a symphony. Mercy held her surviving child, but the victory felt hollow. Life had been preserved at the cost of her sister. Death had been delivered with methodical precision. This is the lesson hidden in forbidden history. Systems of power do not always manifest as violence in the obvious sense. Often, they operate invisibly, shaping outcomes, selecting who lives and who dies, molding obedience and despair with subtlety that society rarely perceives. Whitlo's network remained intact, cloaked by wealth, charm, and the indifference of witnesses. 7 women had vanished before, 1 child survived now, and yet the structures that allowed this to happen were unchanged, unnoticed, unchallenged. Mercy's defiance, quiet though it was, marked the first fracture in the system. She recorded details secretly, memorized faces, cataloged names, and buried knowledge where no one could find it easily. For the rest of her life, she carried not just a child, but the memory of a calculated, invisible tyranny. Her story would surface only decades later, when historians pieced together fragments from courthouse logs, letters, and whispered rumors. Even then, many refused to acknowledge the full scope. But those who saw it clearly, those who understood the mechanisms of control, recognized that Rosemont was more than a home. It was a masterclass in hidden power. And now, as you listen, consider this carefully. The same principles exist in modern society. Invisible networks, orchestrated influence, subtle coercion. Recognizing them is your only protection. You are no longer an innocent observer. You have seen the design. You know how it operates. The choice to act or to remain complicit is yours. The story of Mercy, Charity, and Whitlo does not end with survival or death, it ends with revelation. Mercy carried the living child, but she also carried the weight of knowledge few ever encounter. that human systems, society, family, law, even religion can be co-opted, manipulated, and weaponized by those who understand power. Whitlo left Rosemont physically unchanged, but he transformed reality itself for anyone under his gaze. He had proven something chilling. Control is not always overt. It is most devastating when it is invisible, when it bends obedience, loyalty, and life itself without the world ever noticing. Rosemont remained, an elegant mansion of polished floors, crystal chandeliers, and silent walls. Outsiders saw prosperity, refinement, and moral authority. Inside, however, the echoes of tragedy persisted. Mercy spent her days navigating the careful balance of survival, remembrance, and concealment. She told few what she had witnessed, recording details in secret, tracing patterns, and understanding the architecture of domination. For every observer who saw charm, she saw coercion. For every whisper of generosity, she saw the invisible chains. For every moment of beauty, she saw design. And the lesson of Rosemont extends beyond history. It is a mirror for today, a warning of systems and men who operate through subtlety, charm, and authority. They choose who lives, who dies, who thrives, and who falls sometimes without ever lifting a hand. Recognizing them requires attention, awareness, and courage. It requires seeing patterns where others see only chance, understanding control where others see only love or duty, and knowing that power can be exercised in silence, in light, and in mirrors. Mercy's child survived, but the psychological imprint of Whitlo's design endured for generations. Her story, once buried, slowly emerged, revealing a network of manipulation, obsession, and systemic corruption that had operated undetected. This is forbidden knowledge, dangerous, transformative, and eternal. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to understand the subtle pressures in your own life, the hidden levers of influence, the invisible strings that shape reality for men and women alike. So, as the echoes of Rosemont settle in your mind, remember this: awareness is your shield. Recognition is your power. Comment below, one last time, "I see the design." Repeat it twice. Seal your understanding. You are no longer a passive witness. You are awake. You are conscious. And with that consciousness comes responsibility, the responsibility to perceive, to question, and to survive in a world designed to obscure what matters most. Because the truth, once revealed, is irreversible. And now you carry it with you. Comment below, "I see the design" twice. Seal your awareness. Only those who recognize the hidden forces at play can survive the truth of Rosemont. Share this video with anyone who thinks they know history, because some stories were never meant to be discovered.